Welcome to It's a New Day. My name is James Young. And today my guest is...
Karen Zandi. I'm the Executive Director at Hillside Children's Center.
And...
I'm Mary Jo Brach. I'm Service Director of Family Resource Centers of Crestwood Children's Center.
Okay. Well, let's start with you. Let's get into and explain to us exactly what the agency is, how long it's been here, what are the services and the things that you do.
Sure. Well, we're talking about Hillside Family of Agencies, which is the parent corporation that describes multiple services that we have for services to children and families across central and western New York. We have over 120 different kinds of services. We have 40 locations across those counties. But basically this year, one of the exciting things for us is we're celebrating our 175th anniversary. Hillside was started as an orphanage in the city of Rochester, and over the 175 years has grown exponentially. One of the things that we've done is really changed in terms of meeting the needs of the populations that we serve. Certainly 175 years ago there was an issue with orphans and people off to war and not being able to support their children. But as you know, in the city of Rochester, we have families who are struggling with some issues in taking care of their children. So our hope is to talk more about some of the services that we provide to families and strengthening families and supporting them in raising their children. So we have a lot to share about Hillside and the scope of its services.
And please share with us what you do.
Sure. Family Resource Centers actually were founded in 1981, so we've been in the city of Rochester for quite some time. We've been part of Crestwood Children's Center since 2005, and Hillside Family of Agencies is that larger umbrella. Crestwood is one of the affiliates under that umbrella. We're neighborhood-based centers. We welcome families, all families within neighborhoods, and we try to provide support to parents in their parenting of their children, and we work with the very youngest of children, knowing that work in those earliest ages, especially under 5, is really formative for the rest of their lives. So we do everything from early childhood development. We have pre-K classes within the city, and we offer parenting groups for parents. We do home visiting programs, and we even have programs for fathers and the grandparents who are raising their grandchildren, kinship care providers, aunts and uncles who are taking on their primary responsibility of raising children in their families.
I like that term, kinship caring. What was that?
Kinship caregivers,
yeah,
yes.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yes, it is. It is. It's quite a concept to understand that your network of family is not necessarily that typical nuclear family that we always refer to, but the kin in our lives are sometimes from very unlikely sources, and we'll talk more about that later.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the services that you provide? What happens when, for instance, I don't know if this happens, but if a parent says, I have a child that's out of control, take this child, do something with him or her.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I can describe to you a little bit of Hillside has many residential locations. We have special educational programs. Our Helper and Education Center serves a lot of Rochester City School District youth who come and have special education needs and some emotional difficulties as well as learning difficulties. But basically, it's a broad array and what we refer to as a continuum of care. From foster care to residential out-of-home care, and we work with some of the children who come in and out of hospital placements. But most of our services, over half of our budget, is really to provide services in-home in the communities to support parents in raising their children. When you pose that question to me, what does a parent do? We have a 24/7 Hello Hillside telephone number that we also have a website that at www.hillside.com where people can look up and say, what are the services? We recently put a search engine in there, so if you say, here's the problem that my child experiences, it can help you navigate what kind of services might I seek some help for. But really, we have somebody 24/7 to answer a phone call. Say, help me think through what might you provide if I need help for my child. So that's how to access us, and our folks in the Integration Center can help parents think through, understand what might be happening with their children and how can we help them access some of the supports. As Mary Jo was saying, the scope of our services are very broad. So we have preventive programs that come in to help families in supporting, educating them more, helping them to understand some of the traumas that their children might have experienced and how to work through them. Some of the parents have experienced traumas. How do we support them in gaining their ground and getting their footing about how might I intervene differently? One of the significant services that we have right here on Main Street is our outpatient clinic that's offered through Crestwood, that's outpatient counseling and does help parents and children with navigating some of those difficulties and the traumas in their lives. Another one of the services that we have is reinvesting in youth. So some of the youth in the city and in the county that have gotten in some difficulties maybe with probation, we are working with them with some of the neighborhood support centers to get re-engaged in more positive activities, helping kids stay out of some of the difficulties that are presenting as problems on the streets for them.
And from a family point of view, how do you engage entire families, or the kinship concept that you were talking about? How do you bring all that together?
Actually, that's a really good question, because part of what we've tried to do is put together an array of programs that could engage families in different ways. So as I mentioned, we have our pre-kindergarten, so a 4-year-old who is preparing to go off to kindergarten in a year. We're working intensively with them 5 days a week through the program. But the parents come in and we say, hey, would you like to participate in the Incredible Years Parenting Skills Program? That's 14 weeks. So they might sign up for that. And so while their child is in the pre-K classroom, we're working with the parent on their parenting skills. A dad might be the one to bring their child in and out. And so in an evening program, we can offer an educational support group just for dads. Dads are welcome in all of our programs, but we have found that, of course, there's more meaningful discussion and rapport and a greater comfort level if they're in a group that's with other dads, and they can share common experiences about how they can engage in the lives of their children despite their various circumstances in life. So we have kinship care providers. Actually, that program, it's called Skip Generations, and it started back in the 90s because we saw that in our parent groups, there were a lot of grandmothers, and some of them were very young. There's such a range, late 30s, early 40s. Some were in their 60s, 70s, or 80s, so we had a really wide range, but their issues were really unique. They were really trying to parent again. We have a curriculum called PASTA, Parenting a Second Time Around, and that's really what they were there for. It's like, how do I do this again? I thought I had raised my family, and now it's a different world in which I'm raising. The issues are different. The complexities of their lives, the challenges that we're all facing are really different than when I was raising my children. So I need to learn how to parent in this new environment. So we created a group for them. And actually, we're in the process of establishing a group for grandfathers in particular, in the same way that we did for fathers. So Skip Generations too, specifically for grandfathers, so that they could have that kind of support. We also find that there are some families who are really reluctant to come into a center to engage in any kind of services outside their home. And for that reason, we're really glad that we're also able to offer some home visiting. The grandparents program that I just mentioned, Skip Generations, we have trained mentors. So they're grandparents themselves who are able to go into the home and provide support and information, linkage to community resources. We have a program called Parents as Teachers, and that works in the same way, where there's a home visit once or twice monthly with family prenatally or until the child turns 5 or enters kindergarten. So for all those years, a family could receive a home visit, could be connected to group opportunities, could have some early childhood screening, and also linkages to the community and through that program. And it's fantastic. So if they're reluctant at all, to come into services, we'll come to your home. It'll be in your territory, on your turf. And it gives us the added advantage of seeing the parent and child interacting in their own environment, in their context, and we can work so personally with them.
Is there a financial cost for someone participating in this program?
No, and that is a great question because that particular program, Parents as Teachers Right from the Start, is funded by United Way. And so we're delighted that the campaign was so successful this year because it really does provide the funding, and we're able to provide that service then without any fees at all for the family.
We were speaking off camera, and you had mentioned that you had been with the agency for 25 years. And I had asked you, what is the intake? Has your intake of clients changed in the last 25 years? Would you share that with us?
Well, I think of it in a couple of levels. First, certainly the organization has grown significantly in terms of meeting the different needs that are emerging. So as Mary Jo is saying, now we've identified grandparents need something different. And so we're developing new services based on what do we see. Particularly for kids, if I think about when I started at non-secure detention, which is a service that still exists today. However, it's decreased significantly in numbers. But the youth, what used to happen is children who were adjudicated maybe a PINS or a juvenile delinquent, that they got into some legal trouble, they got removed from the home and put into residential care. What Hillside has been focusing a lot more on now is research. So research to practice. What works? Let's measure our outcomes. Let's evaluate what are the interventions that work. And frankly, across the state, across the nation, what organizations are finding and research is indicating is that residential care outside of the home isn't necessarily the most effective to help kids. There's recidivism. So say a child was placed outside of the home for a year. That youth may have made significant gains, but when they go back to the community, what's really changed? What are the opportunities that have changed for them? And as Mary Jo was talking about, community has changed significantly. So what we're really focusing on is trying to keep kids home, helping parents raise their children. And those in-home programs are really successful. Families are finding strength. So what works? Help me understand, some of the safety issues or financial issues that families are facing, and how do we support them in working through those? So I think what's really changed is while we still have residential care and out-of-home care for children, the children who come into those programs really need a higher level of intervention. So our goal is to keep that intervention as brief as possible and make sure that families are fully engaged. Residential care truly used to be, all right, James, if your child was in care with us, we would say, here's the visiting hours, here's when you can call, and we'll tell you when your child can come home for a weekend or for an overnight. We're saying parents need to be empowered to help us understand what works. What's your environment? Right now, we have parents that come in the morning to do their kids' hair before school. Like, we don't want parents to be disconnected. It's not a place where drop your kid off and fix them and we'll send them home. We really need parents to be invested, ensure that their children understand unconditional love from them, what their commitment is, and that even for some of our activities, that we're sure that those youth are going back home and spending time in the neighborhood centers where they will be next week. Not, while we have some really nice facilities and opportunities for kids, parents say, I don't have an indoor pool. Isn't it nice that my kid could come there and use your indoor pool? But I don't have that available. So how do we make their residential stay with us as brief as possible and keep them fully integrated in the community so the changes that they can make are useful to them on an ongoing basis?
I'm listening to what you're saying, and part of it is there's a great deal of amount of hope there, but at the same time, I can also hear the devastation for when these young people go back into a community that is not conducive to a good quality of life. And it almost feels like you're almost spinning the wheels. Let's say, for instance, if they spend all day at your facility getting this nurturing, loving, understanding, and the things that young people need, and then go back into an environment where they're hearing gunshots, they're seeing people sell drugs, and this unbelievable lifestyle.
I think you're right. You can't really do family work without doing community work. You can't ignore the context in which families live. And so you need to look at neighborhoods. And I think one of our focuses is really helping parents to be empowered to have a voice in their neighborhoods, to not be cowed by those conditions, but to learn leadership skills. There's a new model coming into Rochester, which we are a part of, called Parent Leadership Training Institute, which is really helping to give parents the tools to be engaged in the civic dynamics of all of the decisions that make up the lives in our city and county. So we try to do that on a smaller basis at our family resource. So our family resource centers are located, I don't think I've mentioned this yet, in two parts of the city, one in the northeast and one in the southwest. The Northeast Center is right behind the Lincoln Branch Library on Joseph Avenue and Avenue D. The access is on Avenue D. And our Southwest Center is over on Genesee Street in East Main, the old St. Mary's Hospital, in the educational wing there up on the second floor. So they're both located in residential neighborhoods, diverse populations, diverse needs and backgrounds, but very much a part of the city and experiencing so many of the challenges, including a lot of bursts of violence that you have been referring to. So these are the concerns which that families bring into the center. They're concerned about their children, about the safety of their children. And this is the meat of our parent groups and of our guidance with the families, and also our urging them to take a voice and be a part of whatever they can to change that around so that they're not trapped in that.
Basically, what we're saying, the agency is here for people that find themselves in maybe a financial difficulty, may find their children going astray. So what this agency is capable of doing is helping, I would assume, first the parent getting some kind of idea or grip on their present situation. So now they can help bring their child through this difficult period of time, but having the assistance of being able to use the agency instead of trying to deal with it by themselves.
I think of it, as Mary Jo was describing it, there's multiple levels of it. So community engagement and where are we participating in the neighborhood centers, and some of our work subcontracts work to the neighborhood centers, so that some of the children that come, through the PINS and JD system and probation end up being the ones that kind of get kicked out of the neighborhood center. So how can we get them reinvested there a little bit differently? So I think of it on multiple levels: community investment and engagement there, but also on the individual level for both parents and for children. We were talking a little bit earlier about how do youth become aware enough and educated well enough to understand I've got some choices here, I've got some options, that to avoid gang violence, that and being involved in a gang because I feel bullied, so that's where I'm going to attach. How do we help those children understand that there's some options, there's some choices, and getting involved in some of the gang issues they're pretty frightening right now. As Mary Jo was saying, they're frightening for parents, and I think that some of the youth that we've been successful with are finding options that are much more productive for them. Graduating from high school, it's really important. The Hillside Work Scholarship Connection program is very invested in the city of Rochester city schools. The graduation rate far exceeds the regular baseline graduation rate for the high school graduation. And I think, even if the parents did not have success in the educational system or graduation, it's really amazing to see that next generation of kids that are saying, I'm graduating from high school, it's really important, it's a way out for me to get a job that is more productive and frankly safer than some of the gang violence and running drugs. I think our intervention is on multiple levels,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
but really I agree with you, inspiring some hope and thinking about options that they don't have to feel alone. And frankly, some of the systems of the service systems are pretty complex in terms of navigating them.
Mm-hmm.
So Hillside works with other providers in the community as well. Like, we don't have a food bank, but we know where they are. So helping people to navigate that.
Yeah, and I think across all of our services, we're really trying to start where the family is. What do they need? What do they want in their life? What do they want to change? And also not imposing our agendas, but what are they ready for in terms of making a change in their lives? And so we really start there. In our Parents as Teachers program, when we go into the home for a home visit, we come armed with information on early childhood development. So the family has a 2-year-old. What do 2-year-olds do? What's developmentally appropriate in terms of their own behavior and their interaction? But one of the first things is, all right, where is the family right at this moment in time? What's the kind of family well-being? And if they're about to be evicted, that takes precedence. So you work with their family. What have they already got in place? What are the resources they know? And you do problem solve with them. So we're partners with them in whatever is happening in their lives immediately, and trying to be helpful in terms of linkages with the community.
How do you develop your client base? Do they contact you, or are you aware of certain situations so you contact them? How does that synergy work?
Well, I think it's lots of different
Yes.
ways. First off, as I said, families can call and say, I need some help, and we can help them navigate that. Sometimes children are referred to us and families are referred through the county, through the Department of Social Services. Maybe there's been a child protection referral, maybe because if children have not been safe, that we can intervene and support the family in, like Mary Jo's saying, correcting some of those basic needs that they have and helping them with that. Sometimes youth are referred through probation, multiple counties. Some of our children come from the mental health services. So potentially a child has a mental health disability or a developmental disability that could qualify for a range of the services that we provide. And Mary Jo, the children come to your services in different ways.
Yes, and top number one is word of mouth. So a family says, oh, my child had a great experience in their pre-K. You should really check them out. They're right in the neighborhood. So it's one family telling another. It's a relative, it's a friend, it's a neighborhood. By far, that's more effective than any flyer. We're grateful for an opportunity like today because it really helps get the word out of what's available, and families can call us. We get referrals. Our partnerships in the community, for instance, with Baby Love program out of the U of R, in our Parents as Teachers program, they work prenatally with families and help meet their basic needs, taking them to doctor's appointments. So it really is a wonderful marriage with our Parents as Teachers program, which provides more parenting skills and early childhood development. So they bring us into contact with families at a very early point prenatally.
How are you received by these families? Because I know from dealing on a financial level, no one wants you to know their financial business. And so it has to, even when we deal with other things, for instance, the conditions of a home, whether if there's enough food there, if there's enough clothing, the embarrassment, okay, perhaps even the lack of knowledge to even know how to be a provider as a parent. So how do you break through those walls? How do you reach someone?
Well, actually, a couple things. We were just talking about home visiting. We always give the family an option to meet not in their home. If there is, as you say, some embarrassment, some circumstances that would lead them not to be comfortable having us come to their home, come to our center, come to a library. We find another place in the community where we can meet and still do that visit. So they always have that option. I think our our staff are incredibly competent, sensitive, culturally astute, so that they develop rapport very well, and I think they put parents at ease. When families come into our center, actually, I think there's a tremendous relief to sit in a group of other parents and hear some of the same concerns and some of the deep grief and challenges and pains that they're going through, because they do realize, I'm not the only one going through this. And so they actually begin to welcome the opportunity to bear some of that and to see that they have company in those challenges, and they can begin to then learn from each other what's worked for this family. Maybe it'll work for me. And they're very encouraging of one another, and that is magic. That is magic when it happens, when they can bring comfort to one another and encouragement to one another.
I concur, Mary Jo. I think that it takes a great deal of compassion. It's not about blaming. You are where you are. Let's start with that. Not about how did you get here, or why are you here, and what bad decisions have you made? What bad decisions have we all made that we're not going to do again? But I do think that some of our families do feel very disconnected from supports, and even from their own family supports. We had mentioned a little bit earlier Family Finding, which is one of our newer initiatives to help families sort of reconstruct and reach out to some of those extended family members. Oftentimes when you've got yourself in a bad situation, there's cutoffs in families, and who doesn't stay connected anymore. But we're finding for some of the youth it's very important for them to create a lifelong network of support. So a component of that is, and the overall goal is to find 40 family members that we could create that lifetime network of support. And some of it is their parents' willingness to, if they've had a difficult time with a grandparent or an extended family member, certainly safety is a concern. We talk about, was there violence or was there some kind of abuse that would be difficult that we need to be very mindful of. But the extended family relationships, like we're talking about, rebuilding a whole community, you think about rebuilding the community of your family and who's there for you. Who do you reach out to? Who can you rely on? Some of the youth do a connectedness map and can tell us who was really important in their growing up. So was it your best friend's mother? Was it your babysitter, when you were in grade school and your parent wasn't home? Who was it that watched out for you? Because we're finding amazing connections with extended family members, some that are out of town, some that are out of state, that may or may not be a place for that youth to go live, but can offer a component of a lifetime network of support. So I think it is, there's a key engagement factor with families that is about what matters to them, prioritizing what they see as the most urgent thing, not what we are there to judge or tell them what they're doing wrong. But I think, I have a belief that families are really looking for a better life. They want their children safe. They want to raise their children. They don't want them raised out of home in an institution. But I think they're afraid. Some people are really afraid of, if I don't do something significantly different, what's going to happen to my son or daughter. So we're there to help them think that through and to envision that there are better outcomes and better futures for them.
I know in this day and time, because we live in a totally different world, and I've done some interviews with some young people, and they told me or mentioned to me some of the things that they find disappointing being young. And one of the major problems that I've discovered is the way young parents are interacting with their children. They're more friends or trying to establish friendships more than parenthood. And along those same lines, the mother or the father, in either case, is getting high with their children. They're going to the nightclubs with their children. They're dating the friends of their children. I've been told that part of the reasons why some have had children, so they won't feel alone, and their loneliness, and they feel that somehow having this child takes away from all of that, but not taking into consideration, as Cahill Gibran said, our children come through us, but they're not us. And I think that, how do you see that? Are you confronted with, to tell you the truth, I wouldn't know how to even begin to know how to approach that, because I don't know, what do you say to a parent that can take them out of that state of thinking? And from an agency, how do you deal with that? How do you process that, all that?
Well, I was thinking basically some parents need somebody else to support them, to say it's a good thing to set limits for your kids. It's really a good thing. Kids need to feel safe. If you're getting stoned with your kid, that is, that's crossing the boundary, as well as it being illegal. It's just not a good thing, and does not make them feel safe. Younger kids that are exposed to, substances in the home and some of the things that sort of some poor decision making, it lends to an environment where kids don't feel safe, and then they do feel alone because I got to take care of myself. So, a pretty basic understanding is helping parents understand, what does your child need? Your child needs an environment where they're going to feel safe. So let's start with that. What helps create that? And it is tough being a parent. Setting those limits, and you're unpopular. It's not necessarily
That's
a
right.
popular job.
That's right.
But if you think about what kids really need, they need to feel like somebody's taking care of them, safety, and somebody's making some good decisions. So that's a pretty basic change that some people have to struggle with. And if that continues, it does create for uneasy circumstances for those children to feel pretty isolated, and I got to make some decisions on my own.
And part of what we've tried to do, James, at Family Resource Centers is work with parents very early on. So when their child is a baby, and as they're growing in their first few years of life, to reflect with them, what's your role as a parent? What does that mean to parent, and how do you parent? And what is that boundary setting that is so important to your child's safety and growth and development? What does that look like? And if they can begin to do that in those first few years, and it's really established, then the kinds of behaviors that you're talking about would be less apt to happen. We have a curriculum called Family Talk, and it's based on a series of workshops that we put together many years ago because parents were asking for it. They were saying, how do I talk to my child about their changing body, about their sexuality? How do I do that? How do I know when I should answer their questions, or what I should answer? What words do I use? So we developed this curriculum called Parents as Primary Sexuality Educators, and it was a mouthful, so we changed it. We changed it to Family Talk, but that's really what it was all about, to say to parents early on, when they still have preschoolers, that you're your child's first teacher. And part of that teaching is teaching them about their whole lives, including their bodies and their sexuality. You're their first and primary and most influential teacher before they hear anything from the formal school setting, from counselors, from churches, from peers, all the other influences in their lives. You have the opportunity to give them the information that they deserve and need, and that you want to convey with your own set of values that you have in your family. So think about the messages that you want to convey to your child, and how can you do that in a very natural way, a very incremental way. So when they ask a question at 4 and 5, how can you give them just enough information that's truthful, that's accurate, that's using correct language, that's not being evasive, so that they then get the understanding that you're a reliable resource in their life. And my parent just answered this question, and it was okay, and I could talk to them, so I can go back to them and ask them another question. And so the information is being shared in a much more natural way, and the parent really has the opportunity and the right to do that, and the child has a right to an understanding of their bodies and their sexuality. So it's an understanding of rights and responsibilities, and doing that.
At the end of the day,
Yes.
with all of the things that you're providing for this community, what are the end results? Well, what are you seeing? Are we seeing a slowdown in some of the bad behaviors and increase and better parenting? Are we seeing troubled young people going back into the communities, becoming successful? Are we seeing parents really learning from the different programs that you're seeing, that you provide?
I think individually program outcomes are significantly on the rise. I think good things are happening, and we could go through some of the services, and we track quality indicators and trends, and what are some of the trends that we're experiencing. Our preventive services for years have measured two things. That there's not another child protection indication while we're active, and that kids stay home. And they're in the 98% of closed cases when we close and say, you're on your own to a family, that they're achieving those outcomes. Pretty significant, pretty important. The graduation rate, as I said, with Hillside Work Scholarship Connection, that's the goal. Graduation, now it's what's after graduation. So when the programs are intervening, I think the successes are pretty significant, and I brought you an annual report. I can share some of that with you
Okay.
for your reading. I continued to be troubled by areas that were missing, like what are the gaps in the community? Some of the.
For instance, do you have an idea of what some of those gaps are?
Well, we talked earlier about dropout rates. Teen pregnancy is still really high in Rochester. Look at the mayor and the police chief are very concerned about the violence and, how many murders have created. I think the gang violence is pretty high, and I think there are programs that work to intervene there, but I'm not ignorant or using the rose-colored glasses about what some of the families that live in the city of Rochester are experiencing. That there are some areas where we're really missing it.
And those are really big issues. At the same time, we say to parents, in the midst of those issues, in the midst of all the turmoil in your life, you still need to parent your child. So we can't solve all those larger issues. So how do you keep your children safe, and how do you parent in the best way possible? To answer your question, for years, we used to ride on. Parents loved the workshops. They went away and said, "That was great. I learned so much," and it was their feedback, and it was sincere, and we certainly believe that testimony. It was very powerful to us. But we know we need more evidence than that, and so we've begun to do that kind of hard evaluation. And the program I just mentioned earlier, Family Talk. So we know not only did they enjoy the workshops, did they really find a meaningful experience talking to other parents about some of the same struggles that they're having, but we know from the evaluations that they now initiate conversations with their child more often than they did before they took the workshops. So they'll start a conversation with their child. They're more confident in answering their questions. They know where they can get some help, some resources in the community. Those are huge. When we do the Incredible Years Parenting program, we know that they actually consider other ways of disciplining their child other than spanking. So now they're thinking that there's options to spanking and just punishment in that physical way. So when I see those results, I say yes. For those parents who are participating, it's made an incredible difference. However, the kind of bigger question I think you're asking is what kind of impact in the community is that? We work with a handful of families in each of our centers, in each of those groups. It's very meaningful for them, and I think it has long-lasting effect on their children and their children's children. But it's a drop in the bucket, and there's so many more families who need those kind of opportunities, need to have connections. Karen was talking about the family finding and making those connections with for those kids. When we go into a home visit, that's one of the kind of exercises we do with the family, we ask them who is in their family circle. So who do they have in the neighborhood? Do they have family nearby? And exploring with them to identify who can they call upon when they need some help, and making them aware of opportunities to expand that network. What else is in their neighborhood, so that they can draw from in terms of not only resources, but just a source of strength and encouragement. So I think that's really important work, but we need to do a whole lot more of it and to make a difference in our community.
When we're looking at what you are doing, I look at this as a beacon of hope, if you will, in a sea of this unbelievable storm that we find poor people in, ignorant people in. And how do we begin to bring this hope into someone's life? I believe by the information that you're sharing with me on the show today is a way of doing this. I believe that if we can get parents to see that they're not alone, that they're not the only ones suffering from whatever it is that they think that they're suffering from, that there is an opportunity for them to find, if nothing else, some answers, hopefully some solutions, and to be able to turn their lives around. I'm gathering that this is what your agency is. It's more or less an agency of hope.
I like that. That's a nice frame. I was thinking also that Hillside is very connected to other providers in the community as well, and I think that, like Mary Jo said, by service, family by family, I think that that's our strongest place where we intervene. But I was speaking with somebody from the Department of Social Services earlier this week about how do we work more collaboratively with other organizations. As I said, we subcontract to some of the neighborhood centers where we know our children who get connected with Hillside. Some of those youth are really struggling to make the right decisions. So we want to make sure that they're engaged in those neighborhood centers, and we have some contracting that, because we think those neighborhood centers have a really strong base in the community. Let's build from it. Hillside doesn't need to be everything. Let's work with other folks who have areas of expertise. But I do think that we have some opportunities. There's a preventive coalition, so all the organizations that provide preventive services meeting together and figuring out what works, where are we missing the mark, where are there gaps in services, but even doing applications for federal grants to bring some additional financial resources into the community to help with housing or some of the issues that families in poverty are struggling with. I think there's some opportunities for those of us in Monroe County and the city of Rochester to really come together in different initiatives and see if we could make some changes kind of at the higher level instead of, like you were saying, a drop in the bucket. That's really building the base of strength in the community. But there's lots of areas where we ought to intervene in a much more collaborative nature.
And it's interesting that you use the word hope and instilling hope as a way of summarizing some of what we do, some of our mission, because I think that is true. That is what we've always intended, that whatever dynamics happen within our family resource centers, for instance, will result in the family being more hopeful and then therefore able to better parent their children and to provide the home they want to. I think what makes anyone hopeful is that you have a sense of belief in yourself, and that you know that somebody believes in you. And I think that's the spirit in which we work with families. We really do believe that all families want to raise their children well, that they want to do this. But we also recognize that parenting is extremely difficult, and all of the things you mentioned earlier are cases in point. There are so many challenges. Parenting is difficult, and it doesn't matter who you are, what your background is, whether you live in the suburbs, in the city, parenting is difficult. And so, therefore, it's naive of us to think that we could do parenting by ourselves. We need not only a village, we need a network of villages to help us in that. So we're trying to make those connections. We need to have folks to give us encouragement and support, and we need skills. That's the other myth that still is very prevalent in our society, is that somehow when we give birth to a child, we will naturally, automatically know how to parent. Well, we don't, right? We don't know that. And it's something that we learn. Parenting is learned. And we actually could have learned a lot of negative patterns of parenting, depending on the situations in which we grew up. But we can unlearn them, and we can learn new skills. We could learn better skills that are more effective. There's a tendency for parents to say, well, that's how I grew up, and I survived, I made it all right. But our question is, would you like it to be different for your child? Would you like to have some other options about how to control that behavior, manage that behavior, to have a better communication with your child, better respect? Let's look at some options. You can learn new skills. And so that's hopeful. If someone really walks away and says, I can do it a different way. I can do it. Other people have done it. And I think I can do it too.
I think that that's one of the things that I hear coming loud and clear from the both of you, is that you're not basically making excuses for where these people are at, but you're giving them tools to empower themselves so they can look at where they're at and then pull themselves out of this.
Well said.
Please tell us a little bit more about how you, now this is dealing with you individually, how you come to work and you come facing these particular types of problems that may never have any reality in your worlds whatsoever. And how do you separate this? What do you do when you go home? How do you separate this? How do you leave this? Or do you leave, or do you bring it home? I asked that question to a friend of mine who is, he was on the show, and he's a social worker. And fortunately for him, his wife is a social worker.
He gets to hear it?
Yeah, so as he says, every social worker needs a social worker. So I'm wondering if it is the same thing that you use in your personal lives, because I know that this has got to be awful. I mean, just a little bit of work that I do, the calls that I get pertaining to a show or something to that nature, and it can become quite personal sometimes. And how do you deal with that, seeing these problems, but yet being able to come into work every day? And not only do we have to teach your clients to believe in themselves, but you've got to believe in the program yourself to make them believe in it. So how do you keep your belief system intact?
Right. Well, you immediately made me think of, I do a part of new employee training for staff that are coming on board, and a couple of the messages that I give them are, I hope you fall in love with your job, but not too much. And practicing safe boundaries, good boundaries. And how do you keep yourself whole? We work as teams. You are never alone. There's always a supervisor to call for support. And as a team member, you say, I can't seem to make a connection with. How about you try?
It almost seems like your working concept with your employees is the same principle, exactly. Which is a beautiful thing.
It has to be.
It's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
I think as an administrator, certainly there's lots of difficulties of working with systems and managing finances. But I believe one of our most important things is keeping our staff solid, because if they're clear and they develop the skills of what works. And they can keep themselves in good balance and feel safe. Some of our staff don't feel safe in the communities. They go into the communities where families live and they don't feel safe. So protection of staff, how do we make sure, do you go in pairs? Who needs a call when you get out there? There's lots of mechanisms that you put in place for staff safety and building their skills. But I do think it is that message of keep yourself in balance, because I expect, as of myself, I expect you to be on your toes when you come to work, and you've got to be. I do tell staff, especially in residential care, the youth that you work with will know you almost better than you know yourself. They will know if you didn't sleep well last night. They'll know if maybe you stayed out too late. They'll know if you're not getting along with a colleague. So they have to be very mindful and very present all the time about how am I conducting myself. Not texting your friends while you're supposed to be supervising children, or but I think some of our direct care staff have like the most challenging job. If you think about you're responsible for someone else's child, and you have to think of it that way. You're as daunting as it is parenting, now you're responsible for doing that for somebody else's child. And there's a high degree of responsibility and decision making. How you conduct yourself, be a role model, how you dress, and I think that's important as you grow, climb the ladder in administration. I think of how I conduct myself and when I'm with children or when I'm with staff, and how I can support them. What's important, but you're right. It is that parallel process. How we treat our staff is how we expect them to treat the families and the youth that they serve.
Yeah, that's exactly the word, Karen, I was going to use. We use that a lot. There's a lot of parallel processes that are happening within our work, within the agency and with families. And just as we were saying very clearly, families need support networks. So our staff do. We need to be supportive to one another. It's that teamwork that we talked about. We need to provide the kind of resources they need to do their job. We need to provide the supervision and personal support that they need to get through those very tough situations. What keeps me going are really all those years of success stories. It's the families who it's been very rewarding to have worked with them, to have seen a difference in their lives. It's like, oh, this is so worth it. It's so worth it when that happens. So yes, that keeps, along with my yoga and my bicycling and all those other good things. And so just as we say to families, you need balance in your life.
Right.
You need to bring balance to your children's lives. They need to get out and get exercise. They need to eat well. So every time we say that, we're preaching to ourselves, because we need to do those same things so we can model that, but also be healthy to do the work that we're called to do. It's a mission. I feel like the kind of work we do truly is a mission, and the fact that I think for most folks who work within Hillside Family of Agencies, it's aligned with their personal values. It's what's important to them in life, and that's why they came to do this work at Hillside, and it's meaningful to them. And so that gives you hope, that keeps you going, and that's how you can do your best work.
Yeah, as you were talking about, thinking about successes, Mary Jo, one of our staff just the other day was talking to me about how, who comes back, some of our alumni, to tell you how are they doing, to check in, or to say, now I'm having problems with my kid, come here, have you go talk to this person. And that is really a lot of fun. When we were actually working on an alumni link on our website to hopefully hear more from some of the youth who've moved on, and it is amazing to me. There's a parent who's at the public market that I see pretty regularly, and I'm trying to think. Her daughter's the superintendent in Arizona, and I think, oh my gosh, some of the capers that I call them capers that young woman put her parents through, But it's those kind of things you think, all right, something's working, and it does make a difference. It's really important work.
And I think that that's what the viewing audience has to be able to understand. That there is something out here that can work, that there is this program that can help you take stock of your life. There is something out here that can help you get some balance in your life. I think that this is the basic principle that most people want, regardless of where they are on the economic strata. I think we all like to have balance, a good quality of life. but many of us don't really know how to make that happen. And it's a beautiful thing to know that there's an agency here in our city and our county that it can assist in helping us become better citizens. I've been gone from here for quite some time, and I've traveled not just across the country but around the world as well. And since I've come back this last time, I've been here now for a year without going anywhere. And one of the things that I have discovered that Rochester or Monroe County, but we here in this area have one of the best social networks, or one of the best social blankets that we can possibly have for when people fall through the cracks. There are agencies, as you said, there are food banks, there are medical facilities that one can go through. And once again, I really would like the viewing audience to understand that they're not beyond hope, that they're not beyond help. It does not matter what you may think that your conditions are, that you are professionals and you have the ability to come into that particular environment and help them turn their lives around.
It is, I would concur with you. I've lived in different parts of the East Coast, but I think Rochester, Monroe County is very rich in services. And I think there's, when you talk about the values commitment that our employees have and the agency has, I experienced that with other agencies. I experienced that with folks that work at social services or people in the city of Rochester, the school district, city school district folks that have a deep compassion and commitment to, raising the standard in the community, the expectations for children. And I think probably for parents, it's, if I think about your viewing audience, it's face your fears and start. Because it's all right. It's not about judgment. It's not about placing blame. One of the key phrases that one of our staff reminded me of the other day is we're helping our staff to understand more of what's happened to children and the traumas in their lives, instead of what people would say typically is, what's wrong with you? It's what happened to you. Like, what happened to you? I believe, as you said, that parents really want to care for their kids and want to raise their kids. I believe children want to do well. They don't want to act out in classrooms. They aren't attention seeking, because they want to misbehave or be naughty. There's something happening there that we need to understand more deeply. They're trying to get their needs met somehow. So what's happening there? And we need to understand that a little bit differently. I think it's a brave move for a parent to make, to ask us into their home or to say yes. Maybe I got called into child protection because of a circumstance that I was in with my child. So it's important for them to be brave and allow some help to come in.
We're just about winding down to this hour. I told you it goes by very quickly. I really appreciate you coming in, sharing this information with us, because to me, I believe hope is our greatest commodity. I think that I think that's what's gotten us into this trouble, is that there are so many people that are living in despair, and they think that that's all that the world consists of. And I believe that there was a saying that I came across a few years ago. People build walls around themselves to keep people out, but they also build walls around themselves to find out who has the courage to tear them down. And I think that's what this agency is doing, and I certainly appreciate you being here. I'm glad we've had the opportunity to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you for this opportunity. We're ready to tear down some walls.
My name is James Young. I look forward to seeing you next week. Be blessed, and remember, it's a new day.